number of people who hung on and clung to real estate because they couldn't turn around and face their in-laws to tell them you were right about leaving their steady job and going into real estate is ridiculous.
I saw all of these like wide-eyed idiots, really, for lack of a better word, come into Silicon Valley. They ran a very successful team in some, tertiary market in the Midwest, and they came in guns blazing thinking, we're going to take over Silicon Valley, and they're out in 6 months.
Some of the cities in our United States, they're like a decade behind other cities when it comes to systems, operation, process, because you got to remember, the service industry of running a real estate team is a very fragmented industry. Never go bigger, always go smaller.
Look at how many leads you already have in your database. How many open houses have you run this month? When's the last time you called your sphere? How many videos have you sent to your sphere this month? How have you not dug into those? Dude, take your own advice.
Welcome to the Refuge Podcast. This is Danny Gould along with Keith Anderson and Isaac Guzman. We are here to discuss expansion teams and the pros and cons of building out an expansion team model. Just to get things kick-started, Keith, since you are the encyclopedia of the group, why don't you just give a broad definition of what an expansion team model looks like, or what it is?
So this model originally, I think, derived from a KW market center model. It's pretty much the first one that really launched this box. So give it KW some credit for putting some pieces in play early on with the team expansion model. Now, the easiest way I could describe this is like the lean and mean model. Like that's the easiest way. It's like, we don't want massive overhead. We don't want an extreme amount of agent count. Like you're not building a team of 100 here. Like this is not what this is for. This is, think 4 to 5 teams of 15 or 20, like small hub cultural fit boxes. Team, it's a full team and it's sourced that way, but you don't have to rely on presenting a massive amount of leads for a ton of agents or work systems at scale. And most of the time the agents are pretty self-sufficient. Like they're going to be doing their thing, but looking at a national presence, right? And so these markets also don't spread out all over the place. They usually go where they have a leader or a connection in play. Typically, we see them, like I said, in the KW model where market centers are actually helping teams raise their hand to where they want to grow or launch a team, and they'll allocate them back to an existing team leader in another market center that's already done it in certain form or scale. And they'll, salary or benefit the team leader in that new marketplace with an override or a split in that next market so that the team leader doesn't have to fully build the team out themselves. They get to outsource a lot of the costs and the expenditures and worry and risk, but take a small override on their team, not have to build it from the ground up. They can kind of start from mid-ground, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So, and just to kind of like piggyback on top of that too, because even the word expansion, right? Like I think people might get confused. So just to clarify, Keith, an expansion team model, because the way that you defined it, I think could be interpreted in like one of two ways. Is it one team that has a proven process that then expands into like other markets, right? From scratch, or are they going in and expanding into other markets by acquiring a small team?
Yeah, it's from scratch. Like 99% of the time. I mean, there might be one or two exceptions here, but typically they can't do merger acquisition because the hub team's not big enough to necessarily consume another team. Like it just doesn't exist that way. So typically it's from scratch, it's a producing agent in another market center that's like, I've always wanted to start a team. Like help me start this team, but I don't know where to begin. And so already coexisting or existing team adopts that individual as a member of their team and says, hey, we'll help you mentor a few agents around you and build that unit. But with a true expansion model, like the thought is next to no expenses. It's almost as if like that team leader, like let's use it as an example. I'm in Arizona. Let's say I have a team of 15 agents, right? And I got a little bit of system. I got a transaction coordinator here. I got some of these things. And I have a partner in Tucson. Okay. So that's like 3 hours away. This would be a perfect example of an expansion team. It's like, I have an agent in Tucson that wants to maybe start some mentorship or a team, but doesn't have all the systems dialed. They don't want to start from scratch and like build it all out themselves. They're going to leverage what I've already kind of built in the Phoenix Metro to launch their Tucson team. Now, that team leader doesn't have the capacity or the capability to grow a team even bigger than what I have here at only 15. It's almost more like an extension of them being on our team with a few more steps of operation and leadership. So they're usually getting a 10 to 20% override on the transaction of some capacity. Sometimes it's even less. Sometimes team leaders are getting like a 5% override on the 5 agents. But think of it more like all of those agents really work for the team leader in Phoenix. They just have a branch leader there that's just overseeing what's going on. So basically, no branch ever truly has a full support staff or structure in that location. They're always relying back on a hub branch where their office admin or staff exist. It's some sort of the foundational hub, but it's usually lean and mean. Like it's not a overhead extensive branch by any means.
So Isaac, you were at KW for a couple of years, right? Not just a couple of years, for a while there. What expansion teams did you like? What did you have any interactions? Did you have with expansion teams in your market center?
Big time. Yeah. So I was actually the guy that they met with. So we had I won't name names, but there's some from Arizona, there's some from Michigan, there was some from Illinois, there was some from Northern California, and yeah, I was a person who they sat down with and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about expanding." And so they asked me questions, right? Critical questions about the market, market share that was available, cost per lead, things like that. Now, not everybody asked all the questions. And so some people showed up and got their teeth kicked in because here's the challenge that I ran into with having expansion teams inside my market center. And so for context, the reason why I probably, at least in the context of Southern California, I probably had more expansion teams in my market center than most is because one, the CEO of Keller Williams at the time was the operating principal of my market center. So when people went to expansion, they went to some kind of training, whatever, they're like, well, why not be at his, right? And then in addition to that, we were number one in all of Southern California region in terms of unit, agent count, profitability, volume, everything, all 11 metrics that they measure a market center by, at least at that time, we are number one across the board. So it was really easy for us to attract those types of teams. And I don't know if we're ready to go into cons yet, but can I talk about like real quick?
Yeah, this is a free flow.
One of the challenges, so one of the challenges that I saw was that they oftentimes underestimate the level of competition in two respects: agent saturation, right, or density, whatever you want to call that. They underestimated that. Right. So they came from a marketplace where there was 500,000 people and 2,000 agents. Right. You go to San Diego, it's 3.1. It's higher than that now, but 3.1 million people in that greater market. And there's 30,000 agents. Right. So there's a lot more competition. Right. I think actually Keith's is probably one of the only markets that has more saturation than a few California markets. I think yours might be the most dense, but
it's got to be either us or Florida. Like Florida's got some big bad behemoths in there too that are a little bit tough, but yeah, and you're right, Isaac. There's a distinctive difference to people that want to expand out of a smaller market into a more attractive marketplace versus someone in a big market expanding into a smaller market. In fact, you rarely saw expansion into smaller markets because it's like once you're in a big market, it's like why would I go to? I don't want to touch those price points. Like I don't want to go to Kansas or Missouri. Like I'm good. I'm either going to go to New York or, I'm going to go to Washington or, so if you're in California, Arizona, or some of these high price point markets, why would you go to a smaller market? Whereas typically the smaller markets would be like, man, I'd really like to not have an average price point at 285,000. Like that would be great. Or even at that point, it would have been less. Like a decade ago, it was 175,000 and 150,000 in some of these markets, trying to go into the 3 to 4s, right? Like that's and that's where the difference comes.
Yeah. And that's the thing is the level of competition in terms of agent density, but then also the level of competition in terms of the level of sophistication, right? Because when you have more money that you make, and I'm not saying that people were smarter or anything like that, But when you have more money, you can deploy more cash to more automated systems, bigger at scale, right? I mean, even to the point where it's like, hey, we use a better CRM because we have more agent population in my team, and therefore my follow-up boss cost is less per person that I add to my system, right? So there was that component. And then there was also the price of leads, right? And in addition to that, one other thing that I ran into was just like the efficacy of having an inside sales team. This was a big one. Having an inside sales team that was hubbed somewhere else. And this may only be like the Southwestern United States where this is an issue. But like a lot of our names of our cities, towns, municipalities, streets, neighborhoods, they are Spanish in nature, right? So when you have an ISA calling and saying La Jolla instead of La Jolla, they know you don't live there, right? And so that was a real conversation I had to have with them after getting some experience. I'm like, hey, your ISAs need to learn the lingo too. They need to see that a double L is pronounced like this. It's really interesting to see that come into this type of market. But yeah, I think they underestimated the level of competition. They also underestimated the price points. And then the other thing that they underestimated in terms of competition was when you're only competing with like Coldwell Banker, ERA, Long and Foster, versus like 1,000 other style of brokerages, cloud-based, flat fee, traditional capped model, all these different things. There's compression in the commission splits that you can charge an agent. You can go. I just brought somebody over to our brokerage in Idaho, this single guy who wants to start a team. And he's like, no joke. He showed me all the research that he did. He's going to revolutionize the game by giving his agents 70-30 splits on their personal deals because everybody's 50-50 across the board.
In Idaho?
Yeah. Some part of Idaho. And he's like, yeah, dude, like he showed me this and he's like, so many agents are going to love that. And I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, okay, hold on. Everybody's 50-50. Like on my last team, even if my mom sold the house, they were 50-50.
That's crazy.
Right. So that's the other thing too. They were coming from markets like that where a 70-30 split is like, man, you've just been bestowed upon the greatest split of all time. And here it's like, that's where people start. And so,
I agree with you. There's definitely that difference of one way or the other, and so a good rule of thumb for people that want to do expansion teams, never go bigger, always go smaller. So if your hub is not in a higher price point or a mid-sized marketplace, you can't go into a luxury space or into a different market without truly being there or having actually like a hub there and learn that market center because
you're going to get crushed.
And they just don't know the level of competition. Now, vice versa, there's a ton of pros from being an established market center with all the competition and then go into a place where you're like, what do you mean you don't do this or have this? Like, I'm bringing it, like, and then we're going to revolutionize. It's exactly that conversation. And it's funny because we have the conversation all the time. Some of the cities in our United States, they're like a decade behind other cities when it comes to systems, operation, process, because you got to remember the service industry of running a real estate team is a very fragmented industry. And there's a lot of small business owners and there's not a lot of big teams. And in all reality, sometimes the biggest teams in the Midwest and some of these like rougher market centers that aren't really super desirable to be in, they're big teams just out of, capacity and just out of the ability to be there, but they're still not operating systems at scale. And even some of the biggest teams in the country, if they went into a LA market center or a New York market center or Miami or Phoenix or Atlanta, they would struggle because of the competition pulling them. So what worked there isn't going to work somewhere else. The other side of that is stuff like transaction fees. I see this all the time. We have partners in, for instance, Reno and Vegas and a few of these other markets where they're charging massive transaction fees to the buyers. Like it's actually on the buyer broker agreements. They're charging an admin fee. It's a normal thing. Buyers understand that that's just what it is in Vegas and in Nevada. If you came to the Phoenix Metro and did that, you'd never get any buyer broker agreement signed because no one can do that anymore because literally no one has that on there. So we have to build a business model that doesn't sustain that piece. So like that's a good example of, this model is going to work everywhere. I'm going to have these fees and I'm going to have this commission and it's going to make sense. So
right.
as a testament to what you said, Isaac, you can't go into another market without massive market research and data to support what you're doing. You better go to the number one competitor in your market, learn everything that they do, and then try and replicate that, because you're not going to be able to go in as easy. And then I would say the last really big thing that I think of that makes it extremely difficult is, remember, when you expand, you're not there. You're not in that marketplace. The leader's not there. And so what ends up happening is a ton of expansion teams, they just choose the lowest hanging fruit that wants to help them launch an expansion model. And that team leader's not really built for scale whatsoever. They don't have the capabilities. They're just a producing agent. They want to make some extra cash. They want to get an override, but they're also choosing not to start a team themselves. So that typically means that they're not capable of doing the entrepreneurship related things to do a startup. So you're going to be carrying all that weight on yourself as an expansion team leader. And at the end of the day, you're not the one there. So there's a lot of disconnect that happens. So you see a lot of turnover. You see a lot of attrition for teams in the expansion model because, the team leader's not built the same way you are in your hub.
Yeah.
Go for it, Isaac.
Well, the one last thing I would say is you're right. And Keith, you and I talked about this too. How dynamic the leader is actually varies from market to market too, or needs to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like in a very competitive market, that person has to
be legit.
They have to be legit. They have to I'm not saying they have to actually do these things, but they have to be the type of person that might own a Lamborghini, dude. As ridiculous as that sounds, I know it sounds ridiculous, but let's be real. People are attracted to that type of stuff. And maybe that's not your
If I start a team in Miami, I'm buying a Lamborghini. It's just plain and simple.
And no way that shirt stays as buttoned as it is right now.
No, it's going to be down. I'm going to have it deep,
gold chain.
It's going to be deep. I might have to actually cut it to go lower and add a button,
there it is.
And 100%. Yeah. Whereas if we're meeting with someone in the middle of a small town in the Midwest, it's going to be completely different. In fact, someone that is even slightly dynamic in that market might be over the top. Someone would be like, wow, this is the best salesperson we've ever met. And it's well, that's interesting that you say that, because but it doesn't matter. It's what required, what does that market require of you as a leader?
Yeah, that's funny. I know you guys are both football guys. Have you seen all the memes about Mike McDaniel and his transformation over the last 3 years? Yeah, it's just amazing.
That's why I said Miami will ruin somebody. Be careful. Wow.
Yeah, stay away. Okay, so in terms of the cons, because obviously we're going to talk pros and stuff too, Isaac. But it's funny when you were talking about agent density and competition. I wrote down and consumer sophistication. So it's funny that those are the two things that I see as the biggest hurdles, because I actually, being in Silicon Valley, dude, I saw all of these wide-eyed idiots, really, for lack of a better word, come into Silicon Valley. They ran a very successful team in some, tertiary market in the Midwest. And they came in guns blazing thinking, we're going to take over Silicon Valley, and they're out in 6 months. They're in and they're out. And what I saw them underestimate more than agent density was the customer sophistication, the clients. You're talking, guys that, are super educated, guys and gals that are super educated, and they research, right? They do so much research before they know more about the housing market than most agents do, and when you show up at that first meeting, and they're schooling you, that's a problem. And unfortunately, the reality is that for most agents, and even in this marketplace, like Silicon Valley, they're selling 1 to 2 homes a year, making $50,000 because that's what the commissions are like, right? You make a living on selling 2 to 3 houses to your mom, your sister-in-law, and some random open house person that thought you were hot, right? And so all of a sudden you got 3 sales for the year, right? So
now you can start.
Anyways, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Now, yeah.
Me and Keith never experienced.
Yeah,
that. I know I never experienced that. Danny, that probably happens to you every day.
I always thought I did, but my waves were just crossed. No one really gave me the benefit of that,
So coming back to that, what do you see? And I'll leave this question open to the both of you. What do teams underestimate more when they're expanding into a market? Would it be agent density, / competition, or would it be the level of sophistication of the consumer? Like, what do you see as the largest, the more lethal of the two?
I almost don't say either. Like, I think that's the hard part is I think there's a third bucket. I maybe agent density is the wrong word, because like there are some that there's more competition. I think it's more like market knowledge of the agent box is more like what you're describing. Like, there can be a ton of agents in a marketplace, but what's required of you as a leader in that market to run the company is that agent density type conversation. Because in all reality, if the price points are fairly the same, if they're neck and neck, then you're not going to have any real issues with, I think, those combos. But like at the same point, $1 million house in the middle of Texas is going to be way harder than a $1 million house in LA or in San Diego, because technically $1 million property in San Diego is a first time home buyer, and $1 million house in Texas is probably someone that has owned oil rigs for the last decade of their life. Like, so, you know, like, and it's weird because they only have to afford $1 million house because that's the most expensive house in all of Texas, unless you're selling something to someone that plays on one of those teams. Right. So I think it more determines some of those pieces. So if you're a dynamic leader and you can expand, I don't think that's the issue. I think understanding what the market is going to require of you in different competitive boxes is the more difficult piece, because people have expectations based on what their market is. So they just assume that, oh, if my market's like this, then clearly every other market's going to be easy or different based on that. And they get in there and they don't realize it. So I think you can handle the other piece, the actual consumer side of things, as long as you have someone that's local that understands how people think, even in the slightest. But I think it's way harder to then comprehend the knowledge of the marketplace and what's required for the business side of running that team.
Yeah. And actually, it's an echo of that, but I think to answer that as well, like, I think you know, most of us have probably seen like the Hormozi. I don't know if he created it or that's just where I learned it, but the value equation, right? Where it's like dream outcome, likelihood of achievement divided by time delay and effort and sacrifice, right? And so when you start looking at that, it's like, yeah, different markets, agents place a premium on different parts of that, right?
Right.
And so like a good example is here in San Diego, the likelihood of achievement is one of the biggest things you should focus on as a value proposition to agents, right? Because of the agent saturation. So I think that's a symptom of high agent saturation, right? Is that the likelihood of achievement is very low, right? I would argue that there's places where it's like, you know, so in other words, if you can enhance the likelihood that someone sells 4 houses in San Diego, right? They don't really care about selling 6 because the price points are so high. And then because the agent saturation is so high, they care more about like, I don't have to go back to my old job, right? Like the number of people who hung on and clung to real estate because they couldn't turn around and face their in-laws to tell them you were right about leaving their steady job and going into real estate is ridiculous, you know? And so I've done enough onboarding and exit interviews to know like that's a real thing. And so if you can increase the likelihood that that person doesn't have to tuck tail and go back to their old job, dude, that's a premium. Whereas like in some other markets, right, the premium for them is, dude, I know how to sell 115 homes. I know I can do that. I know a lot of people, right? And all these different things. And the market or the agent saturation isn't very high. What I need is to be able to do it with less of my personal time. Right. Like Keith was actually talking with a guy earlier in a smaller market in Texas. And for him, his premium, the way I understood it, his premium was, how can I reduce the amount of time that I have to invest to make the same amount of money? And that's a very different conversation. And I think it varies from market to market. And if you think about production is really just a factor of agent count. So therefore your main primary job is attracting agents. Okay, cool. I got to be able to understand the psyche of an agent, what's important to them in this market that I'm going into. And so without that, a level of understanding, to Keith's point, if you have a person in there that knows the market really well, you have that distinct advantage versus like, I think you can like cost per lead and all that stuff. I think you could spreadsheet that out And as long as you have a long enough runway to make some big failures along the way and take a couple L's, I think you figure that out faster than you figure out the psychology of what it takes to attract in a given market.
Yeah. I don't think it's the best, like an expansion model is not the best way to just make a quick buck.
Good.
I think that's what people think. Like, they're like, I'm going to go into this because I'm already successful here.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a 10 extra grand a month. Like, I'm excited. Like, I'm just going to get a couple agents. They're going to pay me splits. It's easier to add 4 more agents in this market than just add 4 more agents in my hub. And I disagree entirely. Like, if you can't even build a foundational, large structured team in your own market center, then stop spreading thin. That's what a lot of teams end up doing, is they view their own team locally as harder to add 4 more here than to just pick a team leader and add the low hanging fruit of the 4 to 5 in that market center and add on that income. And it spreads them too thin. And then their overhead at their hub hurts all the rest of them. And then, they self-destruct because there's not enough structure to support all these leaders. And so that's the biggest pitfall that I saw all the time, is you have these teams that only have a team of like 15 to 20 agents. And they're like, I want to expand in another marketplace, but I don't really have a sales manager even in my own, or a recruiter, but I have a TC, a listing coordinator, 3 executive assistants, but I want to expand to another market center because they have the operation of just satisfying the deals, and I have leads and I have opportunity there. It's not about that. So I think that's the hard part, that a lot of team leaders down that stretch have made those mistakes and realize, like, oh, it's harder to do because I didn't have as much support staff in doing this as I thought. And they thought it would just be easy to add an individual there, and then that individual would work just as hard as they do here to run that team. But they didn't remember that person doesn't own that company. It's not the same thing. They're not going to be as invested as you are running your own team. And so that's that pitfall that happens all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Having that foundation dialed in, I think, and honestly, like I'll say I made this mistake too, right? Like, you get wide-eyed and start, like, as a team leader, like wanting to expand before you have all of your ducks in a row. Like I was in Silicon Valley proper, and I started recruiting agents, and not that this is like necessarily like a true expansion team, right? But I was starting to recruit agents in counties that were, with traffic an hour to 2.5 hours away from us. And so when you start going when you start going that 10 miles, exactly right. But with traffic, 2.5 hours. Sure. No joke, actually. Yeah. But it is having that foundation dialed in, I think, is super crucial. If I had it to do over again, I think that, it would have been really, really easy to get to 100 million just focusing on one market. And then once you're at 9 figures and you've got all of that operation like dialed in, then you can expand into like the next territory. Then you can expand into like the next market because you've already got your systems and everything dialed in. So Keith, I would, even though I've never walked that walk before, intuitively, I think that it makes sense.
I don't even have 100% of my systems built out, and I'm one of the largest teams in the country. So I think the issue is I don't think anybody puts enough weight in the depth of how much system and process needs to be established for you to be able to plug and play that model somewhere else. Like, most team leaders are winging it straight up. They're just winging it. And so that duplication process is near impossible unless you have documented value engines across the country.
And I do believe that there are some systems that are easily scalable, meaning that like they translate 1-to-1 into different markets, right? Listing process being one of them. I think that if you've got a listing process dialed in even then I'm like, actually, that's not true.
Because there's a lot of markets that don't use the same lock boxes. There's a lot of them that don't allow certain types of signs.
Right.
Brokers can figure this stuff out all the time when they start to scale. Like, we run into the issue with LPT, like open house signs we use in Arizona can't be used in other parts of the country, or they don't use their signs in our market because they would just blow over, or the ground's too hard to stick an open house sign in the ground here in Arizona. So like they ran into this issue where they were trying to buy, this is just a simplest of little things. And we're talking one of the largest brokerages in the country now figured that out when they came into our market. And they ordered us a bunch of open house signs. We had an agreement. They were going to like get us about like 100 and some signs for our agents. for open house, or it might have even been more. And they delivered them, and we were all excited. And then they show up and they're like, "Hey guys, like we didn't talk about this, but these don't work here." And they were like, "What do you mean?" And that conversation came up of like the open house signs we use in Arizona are corrugated A-frames with sandbags, because we physically can't puncture signs into the ground because it's so dry and so hard, and there's asphalt everywhere. Like it doesn't work. Whereas in anywhere in the South, especially Florida, the ground is basically water. You could just stick it in there and you're good to go and no problem at all. And so like, that's an example of how even the simplest of processes, it's something as simple as an open house process. You would think that that could work everywhere just the same. And it doesn't. It doesn't.
Coming back to leads, Isaac, because you brought this up before, underestimating the price of leads. I was actually having a conversation with a guy yesterday, a young lad, I should say. He's a younger agent here in San Jose. And we were talking about, and this is super relevant to this conversation, is maybe just as important as, underestimating the price of leads is underestimating what lead generation strategies work from market to market.
Yeah.
Because you can talk to agents around the country and there's a seasonality to lead gen strategies, right? So they're like some lead gen strategies work really well in some seasons and then like just horrible in others, right? And then across different markets, you see different things work really well. And then in some markets, it's the same strategy is like you're just throwing money down the toilet. And so how does one prepare for that? How do you like go into, so like Isaac, when people came into San Diego, like what were these expansions? The teams that were successful.
Yeah.
What did they do?
For Subway owner, expired. They were all in that box probably, right?
Yeah, that's what they did. And the ones that were successful really did actually spend time inside the market center learning from top producers. The one that actually like crushed and did really well, they spent time with what was called the ALC, it was the Agent Leadership Council. And they came to those meetings because I got them there, right? And they started networking, rubbing elbows with agents that were winning, and figured out sources, not necessarily strategy, right? Because again, under that umbrella, everyone's kind of competition. So there wasn't that much sharing with somebody who's about to come with a budget and try to take market share. But in terms of like what those sources look like. Now, the other thing you also got to consider is the lengths that people are willing to go to. Because there's another thing we didn't talk about, which is, hey, I'm from Michigan, right? I'm used to, all my agents show up to the office every day at 8:00 and do power hour for 90 minutes and average 150 dials a day. And that's what we do. And then you come over to San Diego and it's like, you made 150 dials this month and paid your bills? How?
Yeah.
So that's the challenge too, is like the level of work ethic. I'm not saying everybody in San Diego is a stoner and just chilling out trying to sell a house every other month.
Come on, Isaac.
But like most of them are.
Come on,
most
man.
agents are. All right. I'm not saying every human is, but every agent is not. But to a degree, there's just a chill button. Like I would get it all the time. I'm like, how are people so slow here? You guys talk slow, you work slow. You're all a bunch of lazy, right? And I'm like, yeah, dude. So what are you gonna do about it?
It's us. Welcome.
Right? That's, you know what? I wish I could talk more, dude. The surf's really good today. I got to bounce, right? Like
it's 10 a.m. I'm not even up yet, man. Like I don't even start working until 11.
No joke. So my Keller Williams office, and this has nothing to do with KW, but my Keller Williams office was
San Diego.
was a beach city.
Oh yeah.
Right. I knew, no joke. I knew the level of attendance I would get at a given training based on how good the surf was. Like what was the surf forecast? Determine how many people showed up to a meeting at 11:00.
So it's cloudy and rainy and it's like not a really good day.
And it's all packed. You got a good swell coming in, dude. You're going to get hardly anybody to show up. It's crazy.
That's hilarious.
But it's true. But anyways, to your point though, the way that you get the beat on that is you do got to study who wins and who loses. You got to look for patterns, right? And how are those people doing it? So here's the easiest thing that you can do is go look at who's dominating in the marketplace, right? Look up stats, look up awards, go find your Real Producers magazine, right? In that local market. If the market's big enough to do that, because they produce usually the top 200 producers, And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to their websites and get stuck in all their funnels, right? And I'm going to see what it is that they do. I might even give them a call and figure out what it looks like to join their team, because maybe I put a plant to go through the interview process and ask the question, what are your guys' main lead sources? And let the recruiter do their razzle dazzle and give you the entire playbook of their sources. I'm not saying come do that to me in San Diego, but do it somewhere else. Right? Now I'm be checking people's IDs. A little bit of espionage never hurt. No, dude, you got to do it. If you don't do that, I don't know that you're being responsible.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I just personally think
I love that
the amount of actual teams that actually treat their individual main hub team actually like a business is far and few between to begin with. So people get the cart just so far ahead of the horse. Like they try and expand before they've even established their own company yet in their own hub. Like for us, look at like we're going to break 150 plus agents, 1,000 plus transactions. And we're just now looking at expansion because we finally feel like we have some form or level of systems and process built. Whereas I literally see my counterparts, they got like 15 agents and they're like, I kid you not. In fact, I'm having calls with people and they're like, yeah, I got 2 agents here, 3 agents over there, and like 1 agent over here. I'm like, why do you have so many agents spread out? Like, how can you serve them in the way that they need to be? Now you're just spreading yourself out. You're not laser focused. It actually hurts your business because now you're trying to figure out process for 5 different markets. You don't even have your own hub market figured out. And so that's the biggest thing is people get spread too thin because they have this concept of more this way instead of being really foundationally strong, structured in their own hub. It's a big negative. Now, there are some pros in expansion. There really, really is. Because once you get to a sizable size, like this is where the pros come into play. And there's 2 main ones that I can think of right now. Once you get to a law of diminishing returns in your own marketplace, then expansion makes sense. The problem is people try and expand prior to actually reaching that law of diminishing values, right? So for like us, we have 150 agents here in this marketplace. We can probably add another 50 agents to our team. But like we're at a place of law of diminishing returns. Like I only have so many more leads that can go around. I can only extend Zillow and some of my other partners only so much farther because there physically just isn't more market to grab in that bucket or in some of the partnership. There's just physically not more. In fact, you see it with SEO all the time and purchase leads. They even advise you. They say, hey, like stop spending money on leads. Like it doesn't make sense past this point. There's too many people in the bucket. Google even, it tells you that. And like you see your cost per lead actually skyrocket because it doesn't make any more sense to keep adding leads. So at that point, expansion matters. It makes more sense to go start something fresh in another market with less competition and more runway than it does to keep burning the engine in your own market center. The problem is they don't realize that most of these teams, they have so much runway still in their own market center before they go and launch an expansion and it spreads them too thin. So that's the pro is when you reach law of diminishing returns, you're a built system and it makes a lot more sense to start to expand.
Yeah. And to even further expand on that, I mean, just like from a coaching perspective, if you're a team leader watching this, how many times have you had an agent come up to you and go, hey, I went to this webinar and I'm thinking about signing up for this lead company. What's the first thing you tell them? Dude, look at how many leads you already have in your database. How many open houses have you run this month? When's the last time you called your sphere? How many videos have you sent to your sphere this month, right? These 18-month open house leads that you've been running, how have you not dug into those? Dude, take your own advice.
Yep. Yeah. I think my favorite one, that's so funny because it's so true. I think my favorite one in that bucket is, I think I'm going to hire the social media company to help post all these ideas for me because that's the way I'm going to generate business. Like forget calling the people that are right in front of me. Like our team, for instance, has over 100,000 leads in our Pond account, unworked by agents right now. And there's nothing that's more frustrating than someone saying, yeah, I think I'm going to pay thousands of dollars for this social media campaign that's going to help me my online presence. I'm like, what are you doing? Like there's hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting right there waiting to be called.
Oh man.
But again, it's that shiny object. It's That's ego. It comes back to ego again sometimes. Now, there are times where expansion matters and those lean teams really do work. But if it's only because you want to say you're in 3 different states and like, yeah, I got a team in 4 different states, like I'm this type of team leader, then you're not looking at it in the right way. Like you're not structured. Go look at all these other type of home service companies, for instance. They don't expand until they literally crush their market center. They don't do it. They all try and obtain a certain level of market capture, and then they go and look elsewhere. You never catch a plumbing company. Like this would be like the example. You're a plumbing company. You have a team of 5 plumbers. You're like, I'm killing Phoenix. I'm going to go to these 3 other markets and hire 1 plumber and I'm going to kill it. And that would never happen. You can't do that. They build their market share out and then they decide, I don't have any more market share to go. I'm going to go to another market. So I think that's the hard part, is they just pull the trigger way too early.
So here's something that happened to me, and I'll share a story, and Isaac knows this story, but I think that it's relevant for someone that is thinking about expanding maybe prematurely. So kind of on that same subject, right, where I expanded a little prematurely. The reason it's not like I just like decided, I'm like, oh, I got to go into these other markets or whatever. I had been approached, or not approached, but I was introduced to Flex, whatever, like one of the Flex advisors, right? So basically, I was going to become an expansion partner of a team in the Bay Area with Flex. And Flex, I knew who my competition was in the Bay Area for Flex. I don't want to talk, I don't want to like say anything bad, but I knew what their training was, and I knew how they coached their agents, and I knew what I was doing. And I'm like, dude, my agents would run circles around these agents. And so I got ambitious, and I said, hey, when we open up, it's like how far, like which markets can we tap into? And so he gave me all the markets that we could tap into pretty much from day one. And so I started recruiting agents in all of those different markets. Okay. Thinking that all I need was leads, right? Like if I've got the training system dialed in and the leads, everything's going to be okay. Right. Well, I hire a bunch of agents, right? And then Flex, I get through the first process, like, you know, they've got all these like little hoops and hurdles and stuff for you to jump through. So I got through a lot of them. And then they were like, hey, we're cutting off all onboardings for the next 6 months, because this was like back in 2022 when like Flex like shut down because they were like maybe going to get rid of Flex altogether. And so I ended up having, unfortunately, like for them, like 20 agents in different markets where I had no leads now, and all I had was training.
And you sold leads. Yeah.
No, actually, Keith. So luckily I knew better than that. Isaac and I knew better than to sell them leads.
Okay.
So I knew better than to tell them, hey, we have all these opportunities. I did mention it. I said, hey, like we are being, we are being considered as an expansion partner for Zillow. There's no guarantees, but that is like, if that happens, it would be a big, it would be a big deal. Zillow ended up conning me into spending even more money with them to try and like, they're like, well, you can't be with Flex right now, but like, why don't you just like throw in an extra like 10 grand a month? And like, maybe I'm not bitter, but I'm not bitter at all. But, so anyways,
what you did with the agents though, you said, hey, we might have Flex. Oh, now while you're here, why don't you do some transactions? And
you know what, Keith, they did.
Yeah.
But you know what, here's the thing, right? They all did transactions, but we didn't have the operational infrastructure in place to support those agents at scale.
Correct.
In like 5 different markets across like 3 counties. Right. And so, and even though this was my own backyard, it was too premature. And even if I did have Flex, that model, I think, was bound to fail. It might have gone differently if we had Flex, but I have a feeling that it probably still would have failed.
Yeah, 100%.
It probably still would have crumbled. Yeah, because we didn't have the backbone in place yet. We should have built it out, in the backyard first, and then expanded.
Yep, and that's kind of how it can be. So, expansion's tough. So for any team leaders out there that are thinking about it, think twice about it. Make sure you're ready. Make sure there's no easy ground to capture in your own market. And then make sure you do massive research before you do it. And then lastly, like, you have to understand, is this best for your business? Like, are you really ready? Do you have the infrastructure systems documented in a way that you can truly plug and play? Or have you been winging it in your own backyard for long enough to where you think you can go outside? And make sure you're not, because that will crush you. Unlike anything, like, your retraction will be way worse because of what you did. It'll springboard back and impact your hub pretty badly. So that's my best advice.
Any final thoughts, Isaac, for the audience as we wrap up here?
Now, I think if there's ever a world in which you're serious about taking steps on anything that we do on any of the podcasts, we're real humans. Like, we're available to chat. So if you're ever interested in learning about, hey, what is it why did you guys put this together? How are other people able to participate? Because we're the 3 or 4 talking heads, right? When Austin's here, that represent the Refuge, but there's actually an entire network like that underlines this entire thing. So if you ever want to figure out, like, hey, Keith, dude, like, what you said resonated with me, talk me out of expanding, or I think I'm actually there, but my business partner doesn't want to expand. Can you help? Like, I'm not putting Keith on the hook. I'll put myself on the hook, but guys, I know that we're open to it. Our openness is how we ended up here in the first place. So if you're ever interested in that, make sure that you go ahead and check this out. You know, in the description, maybe we should drop a link for a Calendly or something like that. I'm sure we've all got them. And I know we don't normally do this on the podcast, but make sure that you're sharing this. Make sure that you're asking questions, sharing this with other people. Subscribe to the channel, because we're on YouTube as well. If you're hearing this in audible format, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we want to know what's on your mind. Like, this first series is breaking down different team models, but we can get way more nuanced on conversion with teams. And my God, if you see the spreadsheets that Keith can put together, and the trainings that Danny could put together, and the different things that we have, we need to know what you guys know and what will keep you coming back, because we love doing this and we want to serve the community at the highest level. So make sure you engage in whatever way makes sense. Follow us on Instagram, all those different things, all those plugs. I'm sure in post edit, they'll drop all of that there and put it in the comments or the description. But I just want to encourage you to do that. We're open here. We're not just talking heads that are unapproachable.
Could not have said it better myself. And I think that's where we're going to end. I think that's where we're going to end, fellas.
Sounds good.
That was a great episode. All right.